Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Labour pretends it has a plan for the migrant crisis with a meagre £75 million to, quote, smash the gangs. But nothing will change until we stop defending the human rights of criminals. As it emerges, the Treasury didn't disclose Labour Party donations to the civil service regulator when it pushed for Ian Caulfield's appointment. The Chancellor, who now admits to failing to tell the truth about tax rises, has earned the new name, Crooked Rachel. We are, of course, on the eve of the US election as Americans decide on their next president. So we'll be debating what either outcome would mean for the United Kingdom. Plus, has Labour pushed the UK to the brink of blackouts? We're importing record levels of energy as Labour's radical net zero transition pushes the country to the limit. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most forthright panel, the Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. As ever, as you know, I want to hear your views. It's a crucial part of the programme. mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. Robert Jenrick has accepted the role of Shadow Justice Secretary in his former leadership rival Kemi Badenoch's senior team. The new Tory leader has also chosen former Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride to be the new Shadow Chancellor. And former Home Secretary Priti Patel has been appointed Shadow Foreign Secretary. Laura Trott has been appointed the Shadow Education Secretary, with Neil O'Brien appointed as the Shadow Minister of State for Education. Dame Rebecca Harris has been the party's chief whip, replacing Stuart Andrew. Nigel Huddleston and Lord Dominic Johnson have also been appointed as the joint party chairman. The Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, has announced university tuition fees will increase to £9,535 in England next year. That's an increase of around 3.1%, which the government says is linked to inflation. This will be the first raise in tuition fees in nearly 8 years. Responding for the Conservatives, the new Shadow Education Secretary, Laura Trott, said Labour has declared war on students. In other news, the Prime Minister has announced an extra £75 million to tackle people smuggling gangs. Sir Keir Starmer says he wants the country's approach to border security to change, saying the world needs to be waking up to the severity of this challenge. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say at the Interpol conference in Glasgow earlier today.
We understand how these gangs work. We can invest in new capabilities and enhance powers to smash them. So we're giving our new Border Security Command an additional £75 million of new funding on top of the £75 million we've already committed. This will support a new organised immigration crime intelligence unit, hundreds of new investigators and intelligence officers, backed by state-of-the-art technology.
Now, farmers across England have been left worried for their future after the completely unfair change to inheritance tax for farms. That's according to the National Farmers Union. NFU President Tom Bradshaw made the comments after meeting with Environment Secretary Steve Reed today to discuss farmers' fury over Rachel Reeves' inheritance tax rate. Dubbed the tractor tax, it was announced in last week's budget that inheritance tax relief for farms will be limited to £1 million, meaning all assets passed down above that threshold will be taxed. Over to the US now, where Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are targeting Pennsylvania on the final day of campaigning to decide the next president of the United States. Both candidates, Trump and Harris, are touring swing states in a final push for what is being described as a neck-and-neck election. Trump has already been in North Carolina today, while Harris spoke to crowds in Pennsylvania a short while ago. Polls in states such as Pennsylvania and Michigan show the two candidates are tied ahead of tomorrow's election day. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. In today's Telegraph, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, channeling her inner King Canute, boldly declared Britain can't stop small boats by shouting at the sea. Which is absolutely right. But unfortunately, that's exactly what Labour is doing, shouting into the sea. Labour today announced plans to double funding for its Border Security Command unit, taking the total budget to £150 million. Positioned as an innovative approach to the migrant crisis, which is obviously not innovative because it's increasing what's being done before, and it's therefore a continuation of what the Conservatives were doing prior to the election, except Labour's plan misses the key ingredient of all, an actual deterrent. One of the first things Labour did upon entering government was to scrap the Rwanda plan, as well, crucially, as abandoning the criminalisation of illegal migration into this country by small boat. The Conservatives recognised that crossing the Channel was not a legitimate means of coming to this country, hence the Illegal Migration Act designation of channel crossings as criminal. The people who did so beyond a certain date were never going to be given British passports. The Conservatives also recognised that the Rwanda plan was necessary to deter people from making the dangerous journey in the first place. But now, Labour will process each and every migrant in the backlog, the majority of whom will be accepted. And this will only get worse with the lack of a deterrent. The only way to solve the migrant crisis is to stop giving criminal entrants more rights than British citizens, and so to leave the ECHR, withdraw from the Refugee Convention, and revive the Rwanda Plan or an equivalent. The ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, is not what we agreed to, as the judges on the European Court of Human Rights have adopted the living document doctrine to make it up as they go along. Our rights in this country are defended and have historically been defended by the King in Parliament. That is a democratic and accountable body. The ECHR puts the rights of illegal migrants effectively ahead of British taxpayers. The Refugee Convention, a worthy document, was written in the aftermath of the Second World War and did not foresee the globalised nature of asylum or the ease of travel that there would be in the 21st century. As it is currently written, apparently up to 750 million, that's 750 million people, 10 times the population of the United Kingdom, 750 times, slightly more than the population of Somerset, could be entitled to asylum in the United Kingdom. And the Rwanda plan is what will ultimately deter people from crossing to the UK because they don't then stay in the United Kingdom. They want to come here, not go to Rwanda. So its absence means there is no effective deterrent. So we are left with a Labour government which is busy shouting into the sea, recycling small parts of old Tory plans while effectively opening our borders to anyone who is willing to cross the Channel. Labour's plan is a non-plan, a plan planless, quite simply because it doesn't really want to solve the problem. The socialists believe in open borders. As ever, let me know your views. You know the email by now. It's mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm joined now by the former Labour MP and friend of the programme, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Lloyd, thank you very much for coming in. This is shouting into the sea, isn't it? Because Labour's just not serious about it.
No, I think that your introduction doesn't base on historically how we've got those numbers down. Let's remember the numbers were rising year on year up until 2002. So all through the 90s, at the end of the major government, and they peaked in 2002. And they did that for a number of reasons. One could argue was global politics, but if you remember, 2002 was hardly a year of no invasions. You know, we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq shortly afterwards. But what we did do is we dealt with the backlog. And one of the quickest ways of deterring people to come was to say your assessment will be made very quickly, and within a matter of weeks or months, you will be either back out on a ship home or you will have been settled here. And that put the numbers down. By 2010, they were the lowest that they had ever been, under 20,000 a year, and now they have...
Well, it's not the lowest it had ever been, actually. When Michael Howard was
not the lowest.
Home Secretary, it was very successful policy.
I should
but
be.
Lowest was...
But the lowest in, lowest in 15 years. Since then, it has creeped up. It creeped up slowly up until 2016, and then has been more rapidly, apart from COVID year, increasing. And that is because there were awful cuts in the Home Office. There's now a very big backlog. And the reason that people get human rights stays is not because they have a right to stay here or they've arrived here, but it is because once they are here for too long, then they get the right to family life because they have children, they have settled, etc.
But actually, people who are being processed are being given asylum. This was why Priti Patel's Act was so important, criminalising the crossing, because the people coming in are coming from Syria and Afghanistan, who have over 90% acceptance of their applications for asylum. That's why Rwanda was so important, because it kept people safe. They were in a safe third country, but they weren't coming to the United Kingdom. This was really a very important way of dealing with the problem.
Rwanda didn't deter anyone.
Well, that's because it hadn't been implemented, but it was about to come in.
No, I don't think it ever would deter anyone. I don't buy your premise there, I'm afraid. I think what deters people, bearing in mind the number of people... So the boats have started only in large numbers since 2018. And if you remember, Sajid Javid announced that there was this kind of crisis in the Channel. Before then, people came via ferry, or they came via
back of lorries.
And people died in the back of lorries like they die in the sea. The numbers of people that died were equal to roughly the deaths that we have now, and the numbers of people that came were not that far off the numbers that we have now. The idea that things have changed much is not true. There is a relatively consistent number of people that come to this country. We have forced them to come on boats rather than come on
well, I don't think we forced them. We closed down the lorry route, but hold on,
there is no other route for anyone to come.
The lorry route was a route that you could close down by police action because there's a limited number of lorry entrance points. Exactly. It's mainly the short strait or the channel, Eurostar. With the sea route, there are any number of beaches you can land on. It's much harder to stop the departures.
Yes, you're quite right, but the sea route is still less used than the truck route was. And so this idea that there are large numbers of people baying at the sea to get over is just, I don't believe, to be true.
Well, there are tens of thousands who want to come, and the numbers have gone up.
No, the numbers have not gone up overall.
Well, the numbers have gone up in the last few months since Labour's been in office because people have known that they won't be criminalised. And they will get asylum here.
The boat crossings have increased slightly, not much, slightly.
They've gone up.
We're a month ahead than we were last year, but the weather this year has been more mild. Well, and a lot of it is probably based on weather than it is on policies. But what we do know is it's been pretty consistent, the number of people coming. If we want to talk about a migrant crisis, actually what we should be talking about is the huge numbers of legal migrants that have been let in by your government after we left the European Union. Hundreds of thousands of people of net migration.
I don't disagree with that.
To undermine British workers and wages.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think it was a great mistake to let in so many people, both from the EU, from the point at which we let in the Eastern European people, and then subsequently post-COVID. But those numbers are coming down very sharply because of actions taken by Rishi Sunak, as you know. That was a very effective part of his latter stage of government. But the illegal migration really concerns people because it seems unfair that people jump the queue by breaking the law, but we've also got a problem.
They're not jumping the queue because there is no other queue for them. They can't join any other queue.
Well, they're creating a queue, and there are routes for people who come here legally if they've got skills.
Not for asylum.
If they've got skills.
But for asylum, there is no legal route to come to this country.
But they've already got to a safe country if they're coming here from France. They shouldn't be claiming asylum here.
OK, so
we have no obligation to
your
them.
Policy would mean that effectively we would never have any asylum
seekers.
because the only asylum seekers you would get is someone who happened to be here and their country suddenly turned into a war
we would
zone.
be able to do as we did, as David Cameron did when he was Prime Minister, take people directly from camps in Syria, which seemed a proper humanitarian response.
That's not necessarily better.
I think it is because we took women and children rather than young men.
OK, so what do you want economically for a country? This is
but that's legal migration rather than asylum. For asylum, you want people who are desperate, rather than people who can afford thousands of pounds for a trip.
You want a mixed bag, because if you just have the most traumatised... So Britain takes only the most traumatised and the most vulnerable. The other countries take the most able.
Because we take those through legal migration.
We end up having a huge
We're going to have to move on.
backlog.
But thank you very much, always, to Lloyd. In a moment, did Rachel Reeves break the ministerial code of conduct just days after entering office? Thank you, always.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Maria, potholes, the bane of everybody that uses the road, whether you're a car driver or a cyclist. As a cyclist, are even worse. How have we got into this situation where our roads are in such a bad state?
Well, part of it is to do with actually our climate. In somewhere like, say, Sweden, like the snow will fall on the ground, it will stay there for months. Whereas here we've got what's called a freeze-thaw climate, where the water comes down, then we might have a cold snap and it freezes, and the water within the pothole will then expand and make the pothole bigger. Then we might have a mild spell, and then that process repeats. So, we do actually need extra funding to acknowledge the fact that, we just live in a climate where we're sort of particularly vulnerable to potholes.
Why? I mean, the fact that this happens, these weather conditions happen, is no great surprise to anybody. Why has the problem been ignored for so long?
I think what's happened is we've had, short-term funding. So it's like, oh, there's a pothole, let's patch it up. Oh, there's another one, let's patch it up. But the patches aren't actually really that strong, so then they break down again. So, really what we need is to have roads completely resurfaced, and then they'll just be pothole-free for a very long time. And that really is how funding should be. That's the direction funding should go in, as opposed to just sort of dribs and drabs here and there.
Do you think this government are going to be good for the motorist, or is there indeed a war on the motorist still?
The different parties come in and they've all got different policies that they wheel out, then they cancel the policies, and then there's so much lack of transparency. Like, for example, with the pothole issue, sometimes the government, whichever government is in office, will do some big showboating about how they're going to give X amount of potholes, and you still think that sounds really good.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okwir, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about Labour's non-migrant plan, or non-plan for migrants, and the mail mogs have come in. Daz said, if I were a migrant coming over on a small boat and found out that when I got to the UK I'd be sent straight to Rwanda, I wouldn't bother making the journey. get Rwanda up and running as soon as possible. Daz, you are absolutely right. And Colin says, I personally think our Prime Minister looked very nervous, even frightened when he made the announcement today. Well, we can't have the Reverend Starmer looking nervy. Drawing inspiration from Donald Trump's famous nickname for Hillary Clinton, Crooked Hillary, today the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has earned herself the same badge of honour. The Times has reported that Treasury officials ordered the civil service regulator to expedite the appointment of Labour donor Ian Caulfield to his position in the Treasury with no apparent mention of his donation. We were told the adults were back in charge. Indeed, this is a government led by a man known as Mr. Rules. But it seems the rules didn't apply to his Chancellor, Crooked Rachel. Well, I'm joined now by my panel, Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Amy, it's pretty shabby, isn't it? Rules, rules, rules. We're very pious. Reverend Starmer. And then it turns out you've got Crooked Rachel getting her mates in who've given her money.
I don't know, because when you look at this particular mate, he seems awfully qualified. So why wouldn't you want the best man for the job, to do the job very well? Because I've got some of his results. So he was brought in to do this investment summit. They left the investment summit with £63 billion
It was all done by the previous
worth
government.
of investment and
As everyone knows.
38,000 new jobs.
But
so that's quite a good result.
This was all organised by the previous government. The Labour Party is always on about how all the problems in the world caused by these terrible Tories, this 63 billion was almost all lined up on a bit of taxpayer money before the election.
Well,
so that's bogus. So he's done something bogus, and they didn't admit he was a donor. If he's so brilliant...
The donation was £20,000 over 10 years.
Yes.
So that's fairly small donation in terms of when
but
you
it's
consider...
important, isn't it?
But is it important? Because you did very similar when you were business minister. Didn't
Yes.
you give your friend a job at some point? No, you did. You did.
What friend of mine did I give a job to?
The co-founder of Somerset Capital. I think he was given a job in the
But not by
cabinet.
me.
But he was a £250,000
Dominic Johnson was made a minister.
Donor.
Dominic Johnson was made a minister, but not by me.
But he was your friend and he was
But
put
he
into
was
your department.
I know Dominic Johnson and congratulate him. He's been excellent chairman of the Conservative Party. He's a brilliant man. But I didn't give him a job. So
but he was given a job. He was given a job in your department, and he was your friend.
He wasn't in my
department.
He wasn't in my department. He was in a different department.
But he was brought.
He
You
was
were
in the
business
Department of
minister.
International Trade.
Yeah, and he was brought in
to a different department by somebody else.
I mean, a lot
not
of people.
by me.
A lot of people would look at that and think
No,
that that's sort of a job for a mate. But I wouldn't, because I can see that he's qualified.
Dare I say the appointment had nothing to do with me?
And it's a legitimate
I didn't
appointment.
make the
It's a
appointment.
legitimate appointment, even if you made.
But I didn't.
But he's.
So, Tim, it seems to me just so foolish, because all they needed to do was say he was a donor, and the appointment could probably have gone through. It's just the secrecy, and we see that. Angela Rayner's recently said that something she declared as office support turned out to be clothes. They're clearly embarrassed by the donations they've got, and they've tried to cover it up in various ways, and then it's come back to bite them.
I think secrecy to protect their reputation, but also almost a subconscious act of secrecy, because they can't believe that they might be guilty of something wrong. Therefore, they just want to sort of cover the path that they've just trod. Now, I do think this sort of thing is a fact of public life. People donate money to parties. They are then appointed as peers, and sometimes those peers then go on to serve in governments. I don't think it's a good thing. I don't like it. But if it is going to happen, there has to be transparency. And what politicians cannot do is get elected pledging to clean things up when they themselves are guilty of the same sort of stuff that they're accusing other people. And that's the consistent problem with the Starmer government.
It's the hypocrisy, isn't it, that has really upset people. That you don't want to discourage people from giving money to political parties. We don't want to have state funding.
Yeah.
And actually, we've already got far too much trade union funding, which puts Labour in the pocket of powerful trade unions. So you want individual donors, as long as people know. Because then if somebody gets a peerage having given £1 million to the Labour Party, it's straightforward, it's open.
Yes, it's always difficult, because to what extent does policy follow money when people donate on the basis they philosophically agree with the party? So if, for instance, the trade unions donate to Labour, yes, Labour then does pass pro-trade union laws, but they were always going to do that anyway, and that's why the trade union is giving the money.
Tony Blair appointed Lord Sainsbury as a minister, who was a very generous donor, but Lord Sainsbury is a formidably able man who supported the SDP beforehand. He gives in a clearly philanthropic way.
Yes.
And it seemed to me his appointment was always perfectly reasonable, and everybody knew.
It might almost be irrelevant. To come back to the point about transparency, the key thing is that everyone knows what's happening and why it's happening, and they can follow the money and they can make sense of the decision.
And that's why £20,000, I know you're sniffy about £20,000, it's a mere bagatelle, but it's important that it should have been announced. And if they'd gone through the proper process, the appointment would have stood, because I understand it, he had to withdraw from the appointment in the end.
They did make a mistake, and there are other appointments that didn't go out to competition which are potentially mistakes. But I'm saying it's quite a small mistake in the grand scheme of things. And to give them a bit of space for an explanation...
Breaking the ministerial code within your first few days of being in office?
But they said that they needed to do
Look how Labour
it...
hounded Priti Patel for breaking the ministerial code.
They say that they needed to fill that very quickly. They didn't have the capacity and they didn't have the expertise available.
Didn't have the capacity to tell the truth.
They didn't have the expertise. And I think that you are picking up on something very, very small and going over it because you're trying to make it a bigger deal than it really is.
All right, well, I've allowed Amy the last word. The veteran manager at the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, Dr. Paul Morrison, at Coquette Island off the coast of Northumberland, was sacked amid allegations that he mistreated his Syrian refugee colleague, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Fawi, like a modern-day slave. However, the RSPB has faced revolt from staff over the matter, with the charity agreeing to a significant settlement with Dr. Morrison. A volunteer told The Telegraph the decision was made because the RSPB wanted to get rid of a, quote, privileged old English white man because it fitted with their diversity agenda. Well, I'm joined now by Lord Ridley, who is a frequenter of the island, and Dr. Paul Morrison. Matthew, thank you very much for joining me. What exactly happened? How did this story come about?
Well, Paul Morrison has been the warden of Coquette Island. Coquette, not Coquette, by the way, Jacob.
Sorry.
For 38 years, a fantastically talented and brilliant individual. And in that time, he's increased the bird population massively. In particular, a rare bird called the roseate tern, which breeds nowhere else in Britain. And there were 30 pairs when he took over, 150 pairs when he was sacked. And then suddenly, out of the blue, the RSPB sacked him and gave a series of different excuses as to why they were getting rid of him. Allegations that some of which were false and others of which certainly haven't been proven, and which effectively amounted to a very unfair treatment of a very talented individual. And what I'm concerned about is the island. This is a fabulous bird reserve. It mustn't be allowed to go wrong. And since Paul has no longer been on the island, it's been clear to me, and I've been out in a boat and gone round it, that it's not being as well managed as it was. So I think this is a disgraceful episode of treating someone badly and putting at risk a wildlife conservation success story.
And the RSPCA has made a settlement with it, which would indicate that the allegations they made against him weren't true. The RSPB, the allegations they made against him weren't accurate. And this is rather embarrassing for a charity because it's used donors' funds to pay somebody for an employment dispute.
Yes, I think the way they handled it does seem to have been very clumsy. And this comes out particularly in the fact that his volunteers have resigned from the RSPB in protest. I know them. I know the people involved. Chris Redfern is a professor at Newcastle University who's studied the birds on the island for many years. Hilary Booker-Carey has been studying the eider ducks in the area and is a long-standing volunteer, one of the RSPB's most dedicated volunteers for many, many years. And she carried the Olympic torch at one point on behalf of the RSPB in 2012. So a very loyal person. And for someone like her and Chris Redfern to resign in disgust at the way Paul Morrison was treated shows, I think, how very badly mishandled this has been. Now, as I say, they have settled with Paul, admitted they were wrong to do what they did effectively. I don't know the details, obviously, of how they've settled. But in terms of going forward, it's vital that they learn a lesson that the island must be well managed on behalf of the birds that live there.
Is there a defence to be made for the RSPB that, like the National Trust, they're trying to modernise the organisation, move away from some of the old ways of doing things, and that as this happens, some of the older, perhaps more old-fashioned volunteers get a bit upset. And I'm probably on the side of the old-fashioned volunteer, but is that an inevitable consequence of a move to modernise?
Paul Morrison is 72, but there's nothing old-fashioned about him. He's a highly technically gifted, far more sort of social media adept person than I am, I happen to know. So I don't think that's really the issue. Where relations between the RSPB and him initially broke down were over rotas and time off. And that's a very difficult thing to organise on an island, because it's an extremely difficult island to land on. If the weather's bad, you can be stuck there for days because there's no good landing place. I mean, if it's exposed to the wind, you go out in an inflatable, a rib, and so you can't have a normal sort of working week where you clock off at 5 and go down to the pub because you're stuck on the island. So you take time off on the island. There are a series of volunteers who help man the island. It's an incredibly time-consuming task looking after these roseate terns. You have to do a 24-hour watch to make sure that egg collectors don't steal their eggs. You have a fence around the colony to keep the otters out. They had a rat on the island at one point. They had to get rid of that, etc., etc. So, and Paul Morrison brilliantly went to Rockabill in Ireland and said, how are you managing your roseate terns? And came back and designed a whole series of stone terraces and little nest boxes for the birds, which nobody had thought of doing before. So the success of that island is not down to the RSPB, it's down to this one man. And that, I think, is the point that needs to be remembered.
All right, well, thank you very much, Lord Ridley. Thank you for joining me. After the break, with the US election just one day away, has Donald Trump done enough to reclaim the presidency?
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. The forecast for tomorrow, and indeed much of the rest of this week, is the same. Most places just dry and fairly drab. Could be a few fog patches tonight, and there should be some sunshine tomorrow, especially in northern Scotland. High pressure sitting to the east of us, keeping the weather fronts behind me at bay, but also keeping a lid on the weather and just trapping this zone of cloud across the country. There has been some breaks today. We've seen some sunshine across the southeast. Breaks in the cloud tonight here could allow some fog to form, so don't let that catch you out in the morning. Certainly not going to be a chilly night with some clearer skies. We could dip down to 4 or 5, but most towns and cities starting Tuesday at 8 or 9 Celsius. Also starting mostly cloudy and staying that way for most of the day. As I mentioned, the potential for some fog patches which could linger actually across the southeast. Most places though just cloudy. Some breaks in the cloud here and there. North Wales could be favoured for a bit of sunshine. Tomorrow parts of Northern Ireland may see a few glimmers of blue, and I think actually northern Scotland will be favourite for a little bit of sunshine during Tuesday, but otherwise expect it to be cloudy. That cloud sitting over the hills, so some of the higher routes a bit misty, a bit murky. The cloud thick enough in the west for a little bit of drizzle here and there, particularly around the coast, the east coast of Northern Ireland. Pembrokeshire could see some spots of drizzle, east coast of Scotland too, but actually much of northern Scotland looking fine, dry. Some sunshine here, could see highs of 14, 15 degrees. Some sunny spells in the southeast are possible, 14, 15 here, where it stays cloudy, 11 or 12. Wednesday's remarkably similar, maybe a bit more fog around in the morning. We should again see some sunny spells over northeast Scotland, some patchy rain across the Western Isles early on. That should clear away. Again, some drizzle here and there, but most places dry and cloudy. A bit of brightness, we'll see those temperatures into the teens. Where it stays cloudy, we're looking at 11 or 12.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio.
We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Court cases.
A presidential dropout.
Assassination attempts.
This has been a US election like no other.
And if the polls are correct, it's on a knife edge.
Tomorrow night, stay up with us as the drama unfolds and America decides their next president.
We'll discuss what it means for them, for the world, and for our special relationship. America Decides, tomorrow night from 11.
Only on GB News.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about Crooked Rachel and the RSPB, and the mail mogs have come in. Pat says, Rachel already has a new nickname, which rhymes with the name Thieves, well and truly earned after smashing the pensioners, the farmers and the students. And Robert says, back to migrants, shouldn't ID cards be made essential to absolutely anything in the UK, given the fact we have over 30 million illegal immigrants relaxing here? No, no, no to ID cards. They're fundamentally un-British. It's not the sort of thing we do in this country to show your papers. It's a very sinister continental habit. It's one day to go until the United States electorate chooses its next president. And our very own Tim Stanley has made an excellent case for Donald Trump in today's Telegraph. And he's now with me as part of my panel, along with author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Well, Tim, let me hand over to you. What is the case for Trump, the reasonable, moderate case for Trump?
Let's defend the indefensible. Well, look, if he does win, it's because he's polling slightly better than he did in 2016. So how can it be that 8 years after January the 6th and all the court cases, this man might still be capable of re-winning the presidency? Well, it's partly because people do have experience of him in office. They know that when he was president, there was no war, that wages rose in advance of inflation, and that unemployment and poverty rates, particularly for ethnic minorities, hit historic lows. And if a significant number of men of colour vote for him, that's probably why. Now, you'll counter to that and say, but come on, Hitler built the Autobahn and Mussolini made the trains run on time. You can be good at running an economy and still be profoundly immoral. But what I'd argue is that for every supposedly extreme position Trump takes, I can find something in his record which counters that. So he's a religious bigot. Well, this is a religious bigot who appointed openly gay ambassadors and appointed someone to campaign for the decriminalisation of homosexuality, who handed out HIV prevention drugs. You might say that Donald Trump is some sort of authoritarian. OK, but this is the first president in history to have audited the Pentagon. And likewise, for everything extreme that he did, I can usually find a democratic equivalent. And it's striking how many policies Donald Trump follows that the Democrats have then copied. So the classic one is the borders. He is famous for being tough on the borders. Joe Biden took over and initially went soft on the borders. Then there was a large movement of people, so he reversed that policy. And Joe Biden deported during his time in office over 2 million people. He placed tariffs on China. He withdrew troops from Afghanistan. Even if Trump loses tomorrow, Trumpism seems to have been endorsed by the American people.
Amy, so he's basically just misunderstood. He's a decent chap doing good
I'm not saying that.
And he's misunderstood by the liberal media.
So when I read Tim's piece, I did feel vaguely reassured for about 5 seconds, and I actually considered what it was like when he was in office for some of the sections of society that you mentioned. So the ones that struck me the most was migrant rights, and I had images of the horrendous deportation centres when children were separated from their families at the border. That was very much Trump with the cages, with the children. Then I considered women, the reversal of Roe versus Wade, and I thought I can't, as a having a womb.
But that merely reverted it to the states. It said it's, yes. And that's quite clear.
Endangering millions of women.
No. Not the judgment of Roe v. Wade has not made abortion illegal in the United States.
I understand that,
it's merely
but
enforced.
It has changed abortion laws.
The 10th article of the Bill of Rights,
for example,
which is
in
any
the state
matter.
of Idaho now, you cannot have access to an abortion, and women are dying. Women are dying because they cannot move state quick enough to access that health care. So just on that basis alone,
the baby.
Also, whenever there has been a public
Jacob, I wanna
vote
pick you
on
up on that,
abortion,
because-
people have voted actually to liberalise the laws, and there are some states which have extreme laws the other way, which
And there
allow
are
it
other
up to
states.
birth.
I think it was 7 different states that laws reversed after.
Right. Either way, I want to throw in, because
Can-
it's important to note that Donald Trump is opposed to a nationwide abortion ban. So Donald Trump's position is not that of what Idaho has done.
He hasn't been completely straight with that. We're not completely sure where he would go with that, and he has gone on record and says things that are very concerning, such as women who have abortions should be punished. That is deeply concerning to anyone who
Well,
cares
in this
about
country, a woman
reproductive
who
rights.
procures abortion
But,
through the post is punished for it. She faces criminal sanction for it.
Jacob,
That's not an
you
unusual
said the woman could just have the baby.
Yes.
There have been cases in America of women carrying ectopic pregnancies. The risk to their lives is huge.
Yeah.
They will probably die as a result of trying to carry that baby because of laws such as what we see in Idaho.
Right. But you see, this is the thing. We're getting sucked into one issue
Let me go on
which
another one.
Europeans look at and they're just horrified. What they don't necessarily appreciate is that America, under him, moved towards a patchwork of abortion laws, which is exactly what they have
Shall
in
we
Europe.
go on one that will affect us and our special relationship? What about the tariffs that he plans to impose, the economic
He's threatened
protectionism?
tariffs before and he didn't impose any on
And
us.
that will impact our economy.
Not necessarily. It may affect Europe, but we're out of the EU now.
We are,
and we can have
famously.
our own trade deal with the US, which he wanted. Well, from 10 o'clock, Nigel Farage, that's this evening, will be appearing live from the United States on Patrick Christie's Tonight. So you'll want to hear Patrick. You always do from 9 o'clock every weeknight. But this evening, 10 o'clock, listen to the great Nigel. A new Channel 4 documentary, and that's a competitor channel you may have heard of, has revealed that the private estates of the King and the Prince of Wales, that's the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall, have, over the past year, generated about £50 million in income from public bodies such as the Armed Forces, schools and the NHS, and indeed Dartmoor Prison. This has prompted concerns over whether the royals should be earning money from the public sector. Well, back to my panel. Amy, I'll let you go first on this.
So the documentary showed that as well as the Crown estate, the majority of that money will go back into the Treasury. Fine, we're all cool with that. The royal family have 2 private estates, which are raking in billions by renting out these to...
No, millions, not billions.
Did I say billions?
You said billions. 50 million.
Sorry,
50
millions. So things like renting out the buildings to cancer charities and not charging a social rent, charging full whack rent, charging rent for the army to practice drills on their land, the army that defend the king. It was really disgusting to actually see this, and I think Keir Starmer will have to address this because they're not paying the corporation tax even. I think the way to solve it would be...
Well, no, that's the Duchy of Cornwall.
The Duchy of Cornwall, the Duchy of
pays
Lancaster.
tax on the revenue that's paid to Prince William, to the Prince of Wales,
The
as Duke of
profits
Cornwall.
are not subject to corporation tax.
They're not corporation tax, personal tax.
He pays income tax.
He pays income tax.
There is no corporation tax. I'm finding a landlord who gets away with that
But
at
that's
the
because
moment.
that's because it belongs to him personally. So he pays income tax on the amount that is paid to him, which is the profit that is made every year.
So the profits are eye-watering.
But
and
that's taxed at 45%.
They own such a swathes of the country that I think perhaps people did not appreciate before this dispatches came out. Now, this is going to draw into question how much profit, how much greed
I
is
need to
really
bring Tim
going
in,
on.
because I think Amy makes 2 different points. One is she doesn't like private property, and that's fair. But the second is...
say that.
Well, she doesn't like profits being made from it. But the second is
Not for other
that if you're the king, should you really be taking a rent from the army?
No.
And that seems to me to be unfortunate PR.
Yeah.
And that the Duchy of Lancaster and Duchy of Cornwall would be much better off if they only let things to private people, not to the state.
Yeah, the distribution of land and the profiteering from land are one issue. The other more pertinent issue is that when you're a public figure, the public figure, you can't possibly allow your properties to behave in the way that they have been behaving. It's a fundamentally un-Christian way to behave, and it's not something that's suitable for lands which are connected to the monarchy. And I would point out that in Valencia, where the king went on tour after the disaster, he was booed and pelted with mud. Public opinion can turn.
Hold on, there's a very good piece by
monarchy.
Charles Moore in your paper now, online, saying that he was a human shield for the Prime Minister.
Yes,
and that he was forced to go by the Prime Minister, and that the King of Spain stayed and talked to people whilst the Prime Minister ran away in his car.
And likewise, monarchs can get blamed for when states cock up and when the public is poor or affected by natural disasters. My point is the monarchy cannot afford, it cannot assume its position is guaranteed within society, it cannot assume it'll always enjoy these relatively favourable tax relations. That could change. And so they want to be very careful about how they're perceived to be managing their estates.
All right.
But why is
thank
it
you.
their
No, we're
estate
going to have to move on. Thank you to my panel, my most formidable panel. After the break, Britain is on the brink of blackouts as the nation braces itself for a winter of discontent.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Penelope's, which is situated in the sophisticated Hotel Armano in Covent Garden, delivers punchy dishes from the executive chef Fez Ozalgan. London-born, she's of Turkish Cypriot heritage, and at the tender age of 16, she enrolled at catering college. So, lovely to see you, Fez. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
So you're now in a very prestigious position. I'm always impressed that in the world of chefing, it's possible to get to very senior positions quite young if you're good enough. Talent is rewarded, is it not?
Definitely, yeah. It does take a lot of hard work, for sure. But, yes.
When did you know that you wanted to be a chef?
Honestly, because my parents have a cafe in Barking. And I used to go there when I was younger in school holidays and weekends to help them. And actually, I'll be honest, I just used to really admire everyone calling my dad chef, and that's what I wanted.
And what about your food inspirations? Because I believe the food that you produce now is what? Mediterranean influenced and also to some extent Middle East influenced?
Yeah, and Spanish as well at Penelope's, yeah. So our concept at Penelope's, our CEO, Ariel, he is Israeli, but he grew up in Marbella. So, yeah.
These are the great influences.
Yeah.
What have you brought here today?
OK, so we have our sea bream tartare, which is a really good inspiration of both Spanish and Israeli. It's marinated with harissa, and it's served with a really nice gazpacho sauce, caviar on top.
I wonder whether the camera can see that. It is the most gorgeous coloured sauce on top of my sea bream tartare. That's marvellous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. This new Labour government struggles to answer all sorts of questions, whether it's about who paid for a pair of designer glasses or defining a working person or merely a woman. But perhaps most importantly of all, it still has no answer for where our energy will come from in 2030 if it fulfills the promise of decarbonising the grid. But the data might have answered the question for them. We're importing record levels of energy as Labour hastens the decarbonisation, even though this Labour government had sold its net zero vision on the basis that it would make us less reliant on energy imports. So is Britain on the brink of blackouts because of Labour's net zero plans? Well, I'm joined now by a great friend of the programme, the Director of Climate Media Coalition, Donorgate McCarthy. Thank you so much, as always, for coming in. This is risky, isn't it? Because if you're importing your energy, you're reliant on people having excess supply to sell to you. And unless it's the French nuclear energy, it may not be as cleanly produced as you would hope.
Well, I think what's happened this year is, last year we imported 12% of our energy after 14 years of Tory government. Not the Labour. We can't blame the Labour Party for this.
Well, we closed the final coal power station, which was 2-3% of our power.
Yes. So the Tory party gambled 14 years ago on supplying 30% of our energy from 2 nuclear power stations. They haven't been built. And so therefore, 13%...
But hold on, that's because of Nick Clegg, who said it wouldn't be built till 2023, and he stopped it.
13% was supposed to come from nuclear, and we imported 12%. So the reason why we imported it is because they haven't been built. Why haven't they been built? Look at Hinkley. There has been delay after delay after delay. The cost has gone through the roof. The private sector won't touch it. And so therefore, instead of gambling on nuclear, what we should have done was gambled on storage, renewables and energy efficiency. And we would not be in the mess that
But storage isn't realistic, is it? That the battery storage that you would need is much more than is available, or indeed is even technologically feasible.
Well, storage has come down 90% in cost in the last 10 years. So cost-wise, it's becoming more cost-effective. And secondly, hydro storage, which we built in the 50s and 60s, we haven't built for 40 years, can provide 1% to 2%.
But that's finally, 1% to 2%. Hydro, that's not a huge amount.
And we have discussed frequently, we both agree on hydrogen storage. Green hydrogen can provide the interseasonal storage.
But we need, in the meantime, gas, don't we? That is, whether you're of my view or you're of your view, gas is the transition fuel, and we should have made sure that we had sufficient gas to ensure our lights stay on.
We have sufficient gas. What's actually happening, Jacob, which is really interesting from a market point of view, is that in summer and in winter, when our neighbours who have too much green energy, whether it's hydro in Norway, whether it's wind in Denmark, whether it's solar in Germany and Spain, they are really cheap. And so there's a market when they're cheaper than our fossil gas, we buy it. And it's a market issue that some of this imports is from, not our lack of production.
But it's in the winter that we need it. And in the winter, other countries may be using their electricity. Certainly Norway will have greater demand. It's quite a cold country. We have peaks in demand, particularly if there's a cold winter. And a cold, still winter is when we are most dependent on gas, on hydrocarbons in providing the gap, when there's least likely to be imports available.
There's excess nuclear in summer and excess solar in summer. But in winter, there's excess hydro in Norway because it's wetter in Norway in winter. And there's excess wind usually in Denmark. So it's really interesting how all those renewables with a European grid is actually
but the grid isn't there. The grid isn't there in the UK, let alone a trans-European grid.
No, what I'm saying at the moment...
So that's a real problem, and the grid
Would
raises...
you accept that a lot of the 12% that we're importing is because green energy is cheaper in Europe and we're importing it?
Well, nuclear energy has been a very good source of energy from France. France has definitely got its nuclear programme right, though there was a problem 2 years ago when a lot of the nuclear power stations in France needed emergency repairs, and that was a big risk to the winter supplies for the UK. Unfortunately, we had a mild winter. It's just the risk we're placing that we are trying to do things before we're ready to do them. And on the grid, we're going to need a huge number of electricity pylons to be built, which is an environmental damage of its own, that it's a blight on the countryside.
Well, I think it's interesting that I think what the national grid is a national disgrace. I mean, we talk about the water industry and how that has been a disaster. The same applies to national grid. They are paying £4 billion in dividends to their shareholders and failing to have built the grid. There are billions and billions of pounds worth of green energy ready to be added to the grid, and they have failed to provide the grid.
But they can't get planning permission to extend the grid because people don't like it. So around Hinkley, there was a proposal to have lots of new pylons going through Somerset, not actually my constituency, but everybody hated that. So people talk about wanting clean energy, but they don't want the consequences of clean energy.
Yeah, but then they get really angry when they're not warned that the disasters are coming. Look what happened in Spain. I mean, the rainfall in Spain was staggering. They talk about 1 or 2 months in a day. That's been like a bad rainfall. 20 months of rain fell in 8 hours outside Valencia. And so, the viewers need... Just let me finish.
But natural disasters have happened throughout history. There was a great earthquake in Lisbon in the early 18th century. I mean, these things happen.
What that meant was, if you think of the heaviest rainfall that you've ever experienced in Britain, you go out, and that was 10 times that. And what the scientists say very clearly is when you have a 1 degree rise in temperature, you have 7% more water. Europe has gone up by 2.2 degrees. That's 15% more water on average.
We have always had natural disasters.
Yes,
There's nothing new about that.
No, I agree. Of course there's nothing new about rainfall.
So there's a desire to blame everything on emissions, but there isn't the
I am
evidence for
agreeing that there's always been rainfall, but what I'm not agreeing with is the science says 15% more water.
OK, I'm giving you the last word. This time, next time I'm going to have the last word. Thanks for coming back. Up next, it's Patrick Christys. Patrick, I know what you've got at 10 o'clock. You have the man of the hour. So tell us more, please.
Well, yes, we do indeed. We're going to have Nigel Farage, who is stateside for us. So we're going to be talking to him. Yes, exactly. In other news as well, though, I'm going to pick apart Starmer & Cooper's plans to stop the boats today. I'm not sure they're going to work. Also, Dawn Butler has not lost a whip. Is racism OK if it's coming from the Labour Party benches? I'm going to ask that. Channel 4, I think they were guilty of trying to do a hit job on our royal family. And there's been a tuition fees U-turn as well, hasn't there? So can you trust a single word that this Labour government says, Jacob?
Well, the answer is no, you can't trust a word they say, and people are beginning to regret having voted Labour. But there we go, that's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I am Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and you want an update on the weather in Somerset, I know. It's going to be absolutely lovely this week, all week. Tomorrow will be perfect for your bonfires and for the fireworks that will go off to celebrate the fact that you live in Somerset. It's hard to think of anything better to do in your evenings. Good night.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. The forecast for tomorrow, and indeed much of the rest of this week, is the same. Most places just dry and fairly drab. Could be a few fog patches tonight, and there should be some sunshine tomorrow, especially in northern Scotland. High pressure sitting to the east of us, keeping the weather fronts behind me at bay, but also keeping a lid on the weather and just trapping this zone of cloud across the country. There has been some breaks today. We've seen some sunshine across the southeast. Breaks in the cloud tonight here could allow some fog to form, so don't let that catch you out in the morning. Certainly not going to be a chilly night with some clearer skies. We could dip down to 4 or 5, but most towns and cities starting Tuesday at 8 or 9 Celsius. Also starting mostly cloudy and staying that way for most of the day. As I mentioned, the potential for some fog patches, which could linger actually across the southeast. Most places, though, just cloudy. Some breaks in the cloud here and there. North Wales could be favoured for a bit of sunshine. Tomorrow, parts of Northern Ireland may see a few glimmers of blue, and I think actually northern Scotland will be favourite for a little bit of sunshine during Tuesday. But otherwise, expect it to be cloudy. That cloud sitting over the hills. So some of the higher routes a bit misty, a bit murky. The cloud thick enough in the west for a little bit of drizzle here and there, particularly around the coast, the east coast of Northern Ireland. Pembrokeshire could see some spots of drizzle, east coast of Scotland too, but actually much of northern Scotland looking fine, dry. Some sunshine here, could see highs of 14, 15 degrees. Some sunny spells in the southeast are possible, 14, 15 here, where it stays cloudy, 11 or 12. Wednesday's remarkably similar, maybe a bit more fog around in the morning. We should again see some sunny spells over northeast Scotland, some patchy rain across the Western Isles early on. That should clear away.